this government disobeyed the regulations in 2021 when they increased the minimum salary, the minimum wage. Disobeyed the regulations when they increased the minimum wage in 2022. Disobeyed the regulations when they increased the minimum wage in 2023. And it was not until 2024 that they increased minimum pension by the 50% of the minimum wage. 60 plus years you have to be before you collect NIS. Many people who retired at 55 struggled over the next 5 years, hoping and praying and waiting that they will meet 60 to start collecting pension. GuySuCo owes NIS $2 billion. Because if GuySuCo pays up its $2 billion, look the difference it would make to NIS. The deficit at NIS currently is $2.5 billion.
Manners and respect to Mr. Winston Jordan. You is a great man to the Guyanese citizen. As a minister to the South America land called Guyana. So much negative, so much propaganda. The PPP are trying to tell upon you, but keep speaking the truth. The truth is always there forever. The best finance minister I ever seen in Guyana. Oh yeah, Lord, please guide and protect him each and every day. He is full of knowledge and experience and things that going on in this country. Jordan is a cool and humble man. He educate and dedicate to the society. Over 30 years he give to we in this ministry. Yeah, yeah. Jordan is for all. Lord, no, you will always stand tall. Tall. Yeah. Oh yeah. I am a Guyanese citizen. I never meet you and I never talk to you, but for you good works you have done for this country. I'm singing this song to you, Mr. Winston Jordan. We as Guyanese citizens saying we love you. Yes, we love you. Lord, let no weapon that come against him shall prosper. Lord, you is the God from heaven. You is the God from heaven. Oh, honors and respect to Mr. Winston Jordan. Guyanese, we love you, Winston Jordan. Yeah, yeah.
While browsing last week, I think it was. Yes, I think it's last week, Friday. While browsing the internet, I came across an article on the newsroom Facebook, Friday the 13th. There was this blaring headline called Press Release. NIS announcement, 1 year compliance certificate. That was the blaring headline. NIS announcement, 1 year compliance certificate. And here what it says. It says, with immediate effect, the NIS is pleased to announce that all employers and self-employed persons who have been and are fully compliant for the past 12 months can be issued with a standard compliance certificate which lasts for 1 year. The processing takes 3 to 5 working days. End of quote. That was the announcement. And I was taken aback I was shocked. I'm like, what is this? Is this revisionist history? Is this yet again this PPP government seeking to steal the work of the coalition government or a former PNC government or so on? Do recall last year when the PPP government announced that they will be removing duties and taxes, to wit, VAT and the customs duty on feminine products, women's feminine products. That is panty liners, pads, and then they added diapers for adults. And I'm like, when I read it, I said, but what is these people talking about? What is it that these people are talking about? There is no VAT on these products. VAT having been removed since around 2017 by the coalition government. And I remember that vividly because at the budget consultations that we had for that budget, I met with the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce, not like what is happening now. You remember a couple of Saturdays ago, they had a big splash where the Ashni Singh was meeting all the private sector as one group, Private Sector Commission and Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and all them met as one group and they took out one big photo and put it in the picture. I met them separately at their request. And at that particular budget consultation with the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry, they were represented by two young women. And they advocated strongly that the government should remove VAT on these products. And we acquiesced. It was there in the budget. So when they came last week announcing that they were going to remove VAT on a product that attracted no VAT, we said, well, what is wrong with these people? They don't learn? Then they came back with a statement saying, no, we meant we were going to be removing the duty because it still attracts duty. And again, I said, but they can't remove the duty because the duty falls under the common external tariff of CARICOM. And once it's coming outside of the CARICOM region, you have to impose a duty. If it was being manufactured within the CARICOM region, there would have been no duty at all. So what it is that these people were talking about? But they were trying to play upmanship. They were trying to play with the minds of the ordinary people of this country. And so again, they came back with this story when it came to NIS. Let me refer our viewers and our listeners to the 2017 budget speech at pages 79 and 80. And I will read you verbatim what it says on those two pages. Quote, automatic issuance of temporary income tax and NIS compliance certificates. Such certificates will be one-off, 3 months, temporary certificates, regardless of status with the Guyana Revenue Authority and the National Insurance Scheme. So what we were saying is, look, people came, they complain, they have a hard time getting a GRA compliance and a NIS tax compliance, and therefore they can't bid for works of government. So we said, fine, look, we are going to put in place a one-off automatic, don't matter whatever your status, it's one-off automatic. And during that period, you will put yourself in order with these two entities. so that you don't have to come back to us. Okay? So that was the first one. The second one, standard income tax and NIS compliance certificate. These will be valid for 1 year and will be issued to individuals and companies that are in good standing with these agencies. You see that? That was the second one that we put in place. Standard income tax and NIS compliance certificates. These will be valid for 1 year and will be issued to individuals and companies that are in good standing with these agencies. And we went further. We went further. Number 3, trusted trader compliance certificates. Trusted trader compliance certificates. These will be valid for 3 years and will be issued to companies that have a demonstrated track record of compliance. All of these measures took effect from 1st of January 2017. Do recall that we passed budgets, with the exception of budget 2015 and budget 2016, which was passed in January of 2016. All of our other budgets were passed before the start of the fiscal year, of the financial year, before. And so they had a record in 2016 of 2 budgets being passed in 1 year. The 2016 budget that was passed in January of that year, and the 2017 budget, which was passed in December of that year. So these 3 certificates, 3 months, 1 off, 1 year, and 3 years, were in the 2017 budget. So what is this blaring headline? What is this blaring headline about NIS instituting 1 year? Not unless, because that is what happened. They tried to dismantle everything that we put in place, whether it's the 5Bs program or other. So not unless they dismantle this and now coming back through the back door or backhand to put it back in place as some measure, as some new measure that they put. They claim they claim credit for taking off taxes on electricity and water. They claim credit for that. And anybody who reads will show that the coalition government who imposed VAT on water and electricity and domestic travel for those outside of the areas, the very government removed those taxes in April of 2020, in the height of the COVID. But you will hear them say, but how they remove VAT on electricity and water. We have to pay attention and debunk this nonsense that will come up increasingly from time to time. And while we are at it, they just passed a $1.558 trillion budget. A budget that is supposed to have people uppermost, because that is the title that they stole anyhow from the PNC manifesto. Putting people first. A $1.558 trillion budget that has as its objective putting people first. And yet, in this putting people first budget, there has been no provision for the increase in NIS pension above the minimum pension. In fact, not since 2019, the last year of budget of the coalition government, in which NIS pensioners above the minimum got an increase, and those below the minimum were brought up to 50% of the then minimum wage, And let us recall, Ganesh, that the minimum wage when we exited office was not $67,000, no, it was not $65,000. It was $70,000. $70,000 from $39,000 that we came and met it. 70,000, not 65,000. So minimum pension at that time, 2019 going into 2020, would have been $35,000, half of the minimum. That is what the law says, and that was the regulation of NIS says. Half, nobody must get less than half the minimum wage. But you know what? This government, even the little, the putting people force, this government disobeyed the regulations in 2021 when they increased the minimum salary, the minimum wage. Disobeyed the regulations when they increased the minimum wage in 2022. Disobeyed the regulations when they increased the minimum wage in 2023. And it was not until 2024 that they increased minimum pension by the 50% of the minimum wage. Not until 2024. The government that is putting people first. Not until 2024. And when our good friend, Honorable MP, Annette Ferguson, raised this matter, and I believe Walter Lawrence also raised this matter in Parliament, they were given the brush off on the cold shoulder. In particular, they raised the matter as to the back pay for those who were not paid correctly in 2021, 2022, and 2023. They were given the cold shoulder as an answer. Arrogant. Poor people. I believe those people computed lost $90,000 plus in the 3 years that they were not, that their pension was not equivalent to 50% of the minimum wage. Lost about $90-something thousand, which might have been over $100-something thousand if we were to adjust for inflation and so. That is what they're doing to people 60 years and over, which is when you begin to get pension from the NIS. So you have a $1.558 trillion budget, and there is no room for increase, notwithstanding it would be 7 years this year with not a single increase in NIS for those above the minimum wage. And during that time of no increase, many people who would have been above the minimum pension would now have been subsumed in minimum pension because the bottom is increasing 50% of the minimum wage while the top has remained stagnant over the nearly 7 years now. NIS, 60 plus years you have to be before you collect NIS. Many people who retired at 55 struggled over the next 5 years, hoping and praying and waiting that they will meet 60 to start collecting pension. Many public servants at 55 retire and can't find additional work and hoping and praying to collect. And when they now meet 60 years, they're being treated with depraved indifference by a callous and cruel government. A government who always claiming that they don't have money. A government who always claiming that NIS can't meet the payments. But in the first place, in the first backlash to the first argument that they don't have money, I have shown on 2 previous programs that the present $1.558 trillion budget has so much fat. I estimate between 35 and 40% of the budget is just fat. It's just fat. But this same government that can't find monies to boost NIS so that they can pay proper benefits is finding annual payments in the order of $13.5 billion to sink into GuySuCo. $13.5 billion annually to sink into GuySuCo. And these are just direct subventions. It speaks nothing of the other benefits that GuySuCo is getting. And notwithstanding that GuySuCo is getting annual subventions of a minimum of $13.5 billion from the Treasury every year, GuySuCo still owes NIS $2 billion plus in contributions that they have not paid over to NIS. So guess this now, get this. GuySuCo owes NIS $2 billion in contributions that they have taken out from workers, but they have not paid over to NIS. They have taken it out and used it as cash flow. And GuySuCo is not the only agency in that predicament. There are a number of government agencies, quasi-government agencies, and definitely a significant number of private agencies and individuals who have not paid over, who owes NIS significant sums of money. Well, let's stay with GuySuCo, because that is the one we are worried about. GuySuCo owes NIS $2 billion. $2 billion. But when asked the question, in the question and answering for the 2026 budget, the answer given was that the workers, GuySuCo workers, past and current, were still getting benefits that were due to them from NIS. Now tell me, GuySuCo owes NIS $2 billion of workers' money. So technically, these workers have not paid NIS. But the ruling, I believe, a court ruling, says that once the employer took out the money, it would have been deemed, the employee would have been deemed to have paid the contribution to NIS. So legal argument aside, NIS is not in receipt of the cash for these workers. But when these workers make a claim, NIS has to meet the claim. Now you tell me, who is suffering? Who is suffering? Those who would have contributed to the scheme, their hard-earned money. They're the ones who are suffering. Because if GuySuCo pays up its $2 billion, Look the difference it would make to NIS. The deficit at NIS currently is 2.5 billion. 2.5 billion. According to Kumar, Kumar, in one of his letters, recent letters. If GuySuCo pays their $2 billion, this deficit of $2.5 billion will be reduced to $500 million. There's a massive difference between 2.5 billion and $500 million. But as I said, what is worse? All of the employees, past and present, of GuySuCo are getting their benefits from NIS, even though the contributions that have been taken out of their salary could not go to NIS. So who has to meet these payments that NIS is doing? The people who contributed in the past. How can that be fair? It's fair to the people who contributed and their money did not. I'm saying that is fair, but how can it be fair to those who contributed and their money reached to the NIS? NIS invested it, they got income and all this kind of thing. We are looking forward to our monies. And since GuySuCo is a government entity, 100% government owned, it is the government who has to meet this shortfall by GuySuCo. GuySuCo is in breach of its statutory and legal obligations to pay over money, statutory deductions. To pay over statutory deductions. They are in breach of the law. And to the extent that they're taking out deductions, they're deducting people's money and using it, it's fraud. It's fraud. Converting monies for uses other than the uses intended. But this is 100% owned. They're getting $13.5 billion annually at a minimum. And you're telling me they can't defray this amount, this $2 billion? But yet still, their workers, past and present, are benefiting from all benefits due to them? Sickness and health and whatever else benefits? And the government saying they don't have money? This is the very government that claims it doesn't have money that is bailing out GPL, bailing out Guyana Water Inc., bailing out Transport and Harbours Department, bailing out every conceivable person and entity you could think about. This is a government that claims that it doesn't have money to help out NIS, that has considerable sums of money budgeted under Men on Mission, budgeted under housing subsidy, budgeted under cost of living subsidy. All of these fat. This is a government that was able to give NIS $10 billion last year, ostensibly to meet payments, one-off payments, to those NIS contributors who, because of not being able to meet the minimum of 750 contributions that will qualify them for a pension, did not get pension. Now, this 750 is written in stone. The question is that a number of those contributors argued vociferously, relentlessly, religiously, that a number of their contributions were not credited to them. Dilatoriness, tardiness, everything else. A number of the places that they worked, gone out of business, don't exist in that same form. I was a victim of that. I was a victim of that. I worked at a certain private agency that took out my money religiously for 9 months. And when I saw my statement years ago, there was no monies from them. There was no monies from them. By then, that entity was sold or went into partnership with a foreign entity, but retained the same name. I went to one of the directors, who's now dead. In fact, of the 4 directors original, I think 3 are dead now. I went to one of the directors and I said, you know, here's the situation. I don't see y'all take out my money every month and I don't see anything. The man initially feigned ignorance that I even worked at the place. But then came back and said sorry. He wasn't around too much. He didn't realize I was working there and blah, blah, blah. And then said, what can be done? I said, what can be done? NIS said, if you write a letter, explain that I worked there, my contributions and so on, and perhaps y'all got to pay the contributions that the people said that they never got. They wrote the letter, but when I took in the letter, NIS says, but we can't do anything with this letter. They have to submit your contributions that they took out from you. But I raised that to show I understand where people are coming from. I understand that. It is both a combination of NIS's tardiness and employers' dilatoriness and other. I did a summer job 6 months when UG shut down in 1979. UG, when they had the Rodney problems and so on, UG didn't open back for the October Christmas storm, 79. They didn't open back until January of 1980. So I continued. I went for a summer job at GNEC, which was at that time. And I continued working until the December. And they took out my NIS and so on. But when I got my statement, I didn't see no backtrack. I saw only about 1 month or 2 months at most of contributions from GNEC. By then, the whole GNEC had changed and so on. And I just gave it up. So again, as I said, I raised this because I understand the problems that take place. But I believe, quite frankly, there is a law in place. Don't need any change in the law. There's a law in place that businesses and employers who take out statutory deductions like NIS and income tax and treat the money as cash flow because they may be having cash flow problems, the law is there for fraud. The law is there. But why isn't the law being implemented? The law is there for fraud. Why is it not being implemented? For those who are working today, I give you this. Make certain that you're getting a pay slip because, you know, deduction, your salary goes straight to the bank. So you're no longer signing. Back in the day, I used to prepare salaries and deductions and so on. I had to send out checks to insurance company, NIS, GRA, and all these different places, deduction checks. But you're no longer signing anything. Your salary going straight to the bank. In some cases, you get a slip that comes to you subsequently or before your salary meets to the bank. I tell you, keep those slips. They come in handy. Very, very handy. But back to the 10 billion. They were able to find $10 billion. $10 billion to pay to NIS last year for this, to give one-off payments to those people who contributions didn't meet 750. No. Read Christopher Ram very carefully, because he has been, it's been the devil's own job to find out what happened to the $10 billion. Because as I've read Christopher Ram, and it seems to be the case, the $10 billion was not actually handed over to NIS. It was a kind of reimbursement story. Reimbursement story. But the long and short is, this was a special project. Auditor General, this was a special project. Where is an audit report on this $10 billion? Half-year report last year, no mention. Full-year report to the budget of this year, no mention of this $10 billion. How much was spent in the various categories? How many persons benefited? How much was left back out of the 10 billion? Was the 10 billion enough? Did you have to give any more? When is the cutoff of this? Because some people might not have even heard about it. When is no report whatsoever on this $10 billion? And if you could find $10 billion for that, you are telling me in a putting people first budget, you could not find money out of $1.558 trillion. You could not even find a $5 billion out of $1.558 trillion to give to NIS, clear out the deficit, and allow NIS to finally pay an increase in pension to those above. We who have suffered the consequences of inflation over the last 6 years on a pension whose last increase was in 2019, or is it January 2020? This government, who has as its founder Cherry Jagon, who was a fighter for the ordinary people. This government that has just put out a $1.558 trillion budget, looking on at the misery and suffering of NIS pensioners, 60 years and over. Crude and crass, not a penny for the last nearly 6 years or 7 years, depending on how you count it, in NIS. Now, NIS, as you well know, has found itself in the situation that is partly because of the government's heavy hand in NIS, notwithstanding the fact that NIS has a board, but it's circular. The board is appointed by, guess who? The government. And do recall, for the purpose of this discussion, that it was under PPP governments that one, NIS was forced to make a disastrous investment in CLICO, and two, NIS was used and abused and forced to make an investment in the Berbice Bridge. NIS lost over $5.6 billion excluding interest in CLICO. A reckless investment, which unfortunately was forced upon the board. And I believe at that time, the chairman of the board was none other than the head of the presidential secretariat, who also wore many other caps. Cabinet secretary, and all these different caps he wore, in addition to being a high functionary of the PPP party. Raja Luncheon. A reckless investment in CLICO resulted in about $5.6 billion loss. And the coalition government, acting upon a resolution of Parliament, where the combined opposition had the majority, that there was a resolution that was passed calling upon the Ramatar government to reimburse NIS for the losses it suffered in CLICO. The Ramatar government refused. It took that coalition government. See, I saw Annette Ferguson on a live, I think it was this week. I think it was earlier this week. And she literally, tears was brought to her eyes because she said it was hurting her that people who served in the coalition government, particularly the ministers, were not coming out and speaking out about the injustices, about the fight that we had under the coalition government to thing, and about the accomplishments. And they were not coming out to speak out about the injustices and also debunk the lies and so on. She choked. I saw her. I empathize with her. That this is what? It is the coalition government. We weren't responsible for the loss in NIS, in the CLICO. It is the coalition government acting upon the resolution that was passed while Ramatar was president of this country, but refused to implement the recommendation of the resolution to reimburse NIS. It is the coalition government who signed 20 debentures with NIS, not only replacing the loss of $5.6 billion, but replacing it with interest, albeit a small interest. It was the coalition government who didn't have oil money, who didn't have access, and who were being squeezed by elements of the private sector, influential elements of the private sector, acting on their masters in Rob Street. Against all of that, we saved GuySuCo, the very GuySuCo that was abandoned by their hench people who got big jobs today. They have big jobs today, whether they're ambassadors in Europe or wherever else. They broke up the sugar industry and left it for the coalition to fix it back. And got the gall and the temerity and the audacity to claim that how we severed this amount and severed that amount, and using the 7,000 workers as a mantra. As a mantra. And don't matter how many documents you carry to the speaker to show that we didn't sever 7,000 people, he will not make his ruling that unless they can show 7,000 workers were severed, nobody will be able to use that figure in his house called the Parliament. I empathize with you, Annette. It sickens me. Yes, it was the coalition government who replaced the $5.6 billion last. Otherwise today, and what about the investment in the Berbice Bridge? What about the investment in the Berbice Bridge? Now you're hearing how a bridge that will revert to the government in June of 2027 is being hastily and hurriedly acquired by the government, who will be the owners of the very asset come next year. Now, imagine, this government is now recognized as the creator of crisis and running in to solve the very crisis. Nobody tell the government to go and take over RLM Bridge and to remove the tolls. Who told the government that? It was $200 to cross the Demerara Bridge. Who complained about $200? Who complained about the tolls to cross the Wisma Bridge? And if there were complaints, then you could have removed the toll, which is negligible, which was I know it's negligible, for, say, cyclists, pedestrians, and whoever else crossing the Wisma. But allowing all them big trucks breaking up the bridge, bring out all the lumber and so on, they must pay, and pay heavily. But no, the government run and give people the impression that they're helping out the small man. What small man you're helping out? You transfer money to the big people. All those who can pay, you transfer money to. And if you wanted to really help out the Berbice Bridge in terms of toll, again, it was the coalition government who inherited the tolls, the humongous, unreasonable tolls of the Berbice Bridge. When we came into power in 2015, it was $2,200 to cross the Berbice Bridge in a car. In a car. And while we were forced to pay $12 billion to GuySuCo in 2015, half year of 2015, we were forced to find $12 billion to pay GuySuCo that was completely broke. That wasn't one of our 100-day manifesto promise. It was not. But we were forced to put them at the head of the queue to save the industry from going under. If we were a callous government, we would have refused to pay and allow it to die. But no, we paid $12 billion, asking our supporters to see the wider issue. We paid $11 billion in 2016. And we paid another $10 billion in 2017, $3 billion in 2.5 years to save GuySuCo. And today you're hearing how we were callous. We asked our supporters to see the wider issue. But they were not part of our 100-day manifesto. But because we said within 100 days we were going to reduce the toll, we reduced tolls of the Berbice Bridge from 2,200 to 1,900. And that is the 1,900 that it remained up to last year, when the government said they're going to remove tolls in entirety. But listen, maybe next week I'm going to try and bring it. When they signed the concession agreement and the tolls agreement, y'all should see what they sign on to. The 2015 elections coming up, there was a massive increase in tolls that should have been executed. But the PPP government, fearing backlash at the elections, refused to put it in. And the British people had the temerity and the gall to come to the coalition government at the onset of the local government elections to claim that how they are going to be putting in these humongous increases in tolls. Where traveling in a car would have moved from the $1,900 that we had to about over $5,000 per trip. That is what they did. And this now was being led by ostensibly the chairman at that time of NIS. Look, let me leave that one alone. This is sometimes start off and left off. And it's lucky that Patterson acted under the instructions of cabinet quickly, put in a stopper to all of that. It went right up to the CCJ and we won. Those were the tolls. So you know what is happening now? One of the major investors in that bridge, who happens to be a friend, publicly known friend of Jack Dio, he has more than one business invested in that bridge. And so, if they allow the whole thing to run until next year, they may have problems. So, the government has manufactured a crisis by claiming, well, we can take over the tolls. You see, they don't have money to pay NIS. You know, this is the thing that is aggravating. They don't have money to give to NIS so that NIS could pay a decent pension or to give an increase in the pension. But they have taxpayers' money, not to subsidize the toll, but to take over the toll entirely. Not to subsidize the toll, but to take it over entirely. And then once they take it over entirely, they then hide the toll as to how much it's costing them now to pay. They hide it because up to last year, they used to put it on the subvention to the Borbies Bridge. This year it's disappeared, the subvention disappeared. Now you tell me, how can the subvention disappear when we don't own the property called Borbies Bridge? How can the subvention disappear? And let me say very frankly, something is radically wrong. I'm going to maybe, yes, come to it shortly. Something is radically wrong with that budget. Because here is a government telling Parliament, the opposition, and maybe their own people, that we are now operating and maintaining the bridge. We are now operating and maintaining the bridge. Now, of all the accounting and everything, government, that I know, tell me how the government can take over the operations and maintenance of a private entity unless it has nationalized that entity. And how operations and maintenance can appear under the Ministry of Public Works when operations and when the budget of Ministry of Public Works, operations and maintenance is there for operation and maintenance of assets belonging to the government, not assets belonging to a private sector. Assets belonging to the government. There's a difference between what belongs to the government and what the government is contributing to. If the government is going to contribute, it has to come under contributions, and those contributions need to be explained why exactly you are giving a contribution. So the government has to continue showing subvention to the Barbies Bridge until such time as the entity is taken over fully by the government. So they can't tell you that, yes, we continuing to pay the tolls, and now we take over the operation and maintenance of a private structure. Now they can't tell you that. But that should have been challenged to the high heavens, and still should be challenged to the high heavens, because it's giving you the impression that this operations and maintenance vote that was, say, 1 billion last year is now 2.5 billion this year. When you're thinking that they are going to be maintaining government assets, the difference really is what they're transferring to a private entity. Where's the transparency? Where's the accountability? Auditor General, Accountant General, Finance Secretary? All of you guys are complicit in this opaqueness. So the government manufactured a crisis where none was there. They shut down the tolls, transfer from the user to the taxpayer. A government that could not find money to give to NIS so that they can pay a decent increase in pensions. These pensions haven't been compressed over the last 6 to 7 years. But there has been a lot of writing and so on about this Barbies Bridge story. I don't need to bring it back here. And we will see how that will develop. Manufacturer crisis, come in like the knight in shining armor, use taxpayers' money to solve the crisis. And in the process of solving the crisis, transfer monies to your friends. Because that is what happened. That is what happened. Meanwhile, I don't know who the board of NIS, but I hope the board will not implicitly delegate its functions in terms of looking out for the interests of NIS to these negotiators, because NIS is a major shareholder in the bridge. And again, the investment has suffered. It's not an impaired investment, but it has suffered. And one will hope that the board will find a way of looking after NIS's interests in these ongoing negotiations. The last topic area for today I want to look at is the wrap-up on Budget 2026. As you know, Budget 2026, in all its elements, was passed last week, Friday, ending 2 weeks of what passed for debate on the speech and what passed for an interrogation of the estimates. For the first time in recent memory, and certainly in my recent memory, the national budget has not been passed unanimously by the House. And what I mean by unanimously, you see, when the appropriation bill comes up for its second and third reading, by the time the third reading, the House will say, the Speaker will say, those in favor say aye, and you hear aye, and then those not in favor say no, and then there's silence. You really, if ever will hear somebody say no, there's silence. So in a sense, silence is acquiescence. So even though you didn't say no and you didn't say yes, what you're saying is that, look, let it go ahead, sort of. So you are complicit in that action when it passed. So notwithstanding the fact that you might have said when you were debating the speech that I cannot support this budget, and notwithstanding the fact that you might have uncovered wide-ranging issues of non-transparency, accountability, corruption, whatever it is, notwithstanding all of that, you will still remain silent when the Speaker says those not in favor say no, and you don't say no, you still remain silent. So you are complicit in the approval of the budget. So that explanation given, the 2026 budget for the first time in recent memory was not passed unanimously. In other words, then, the budget was passed 35-28, because you know it's 36-29 in favor of the government. But it was passed 35-28 because Jagdeo was not in the House, and I don't know that is an issue, because apparently I don't know if he was there in the opening, if he was there for the speech. I don't know, because I wasn't there. But it would seem from all the discussions and so on that he was not there for the debate on the speech, the 5 days. He certainly then turned up on the Friday when was the closing out of the budget speech, and he was not there for any of the sessions of the interrogation of the estimates. That will make it 10 consecutive sessions. And since nobody has raised it, then I suppose what I'm saying may not be true, because I think if you absent for 6 consecutive sit-ins without an excuse that the Speaker accepts, then your seat will automatically become vacant. That will be 10 sessions, and he wasn't there for any, as far as I know, subject to correction. But I don't see anything. Anyhow, it passed 35-28 because Asweden also was not in the House. So the thing was reduced by 1. It passed 35-28 after the opposition requested a division. Now, what it means by division in the House? You see, even if the Speaker says those in favor say aye, and he's going by the noise that he hears, and those not in favor say no, again he's going by the noise that he hears, he will then say the ayes have it. But before he can say the ayes have it, somebody in the opposition will jump up and say division, which means now that the clerk will ring the bell and the whips will whip their members in, because you have to, it means now that you can take a vote count by head. A vote count by head, and you have to be in your seat for your vote to be registered. So those who might have gone to the loo, or gone in the kitchen to get a coffee, or gone outside to take a break, a smoke break or whatever, the bell will ring 3 times. And the whips will go and gather. That's one of the reasons why they call a whip, to whip everybody into shape and back into the house, back into your seat. And then the clerk will register each name I think he'll go through force, but I think he'll go through, I don't know, maybe it's the government side force and then the opposition or whatever. But every name who can vote of the 65 and register their vote. And when he's done, he tallies them and he will say, the motion has passed or the motion has has been voided or whatever the case may be, depending on it. So he would, the opposition, and I was listening to Campbell on the, I think it was Context, Enrico Wolford's program, Context. And he said he called for division. Well, kudos to you, my friend. At least our quiet discussions and so on taking fruit. For the first time in recent memory in budget, a division was called for. I can tell you about the other one quickly too. And he got up and said division. And on the division, the budget was passed 35-28. First of all, kudos to the entire 28, because as you well know, the opposition is heavily divided. Heavily divided. No question about it. There's a lot of, a lot of going on between Win and Apno in particular. So for them to have come together, I guess without any particular strategy session before, and voted entirely as one block, 28, is signal success. And we every little gain that you can make in terms of unity on the opposition should be applauded and celebrated. Should be applauded and celebrated. So I say kudos to you, number one. Number two, you have shown you are so against this budget that you're not prepared to be complicit through silence. You have shown you're not prepared to be complicit through silence, and that you want for the purpose of the Hansard and for the public and everything else, for it to be known that I voted no to a budget that is supposedly supposed to put people first, but is putting concrete force and people last. Kudos to this. This is a new. I also learned that in the question of the contingency funds also, a similar approach was taken, where they asked for a division. And I think again it was 35-28. Can you imagine how all our guardrails have fallen down when a government that opened the 13th Parliament at the last possible date in November proceeded 2 weeks thereafterwards and over a period of 3 weeks to degut the contingency fund by $18 billion. $18 billion. And when you read the things that were taken, the monies out of the contingency fund were taken for, you said, no, man, enough is enough. Isn't a contingency fund for contingencies? Imagine one man says, well, we did more work than we should have or we projected. And we should be proud of that. That is the reason they went for $1 billion contingency fund. Money from the contingency fund. Is that an emergency? Is that an emergency? Is that an emergency expenditure? There was not a single expenditure in the $18 billion that met the smell test of a contingency. Not one. But we are in this perfunctory approach to trillion-dollar budgets. The contingency fund is now a piggy bank, a slush fund, another slush fund. And the contingency fund now, because remember, the contingency fund is for real emergency. Seawall break, you could never have accounted for that. You don't have actual monies in. It's not because the seawall break that you have to go for contingency, you know. What it says is that you don't have monies in a vote that will say dealing with maintenance and so on, or capital expenditure for seawall. Or you don't have monies in other heads that you can via into this head to do it. That is why you go to the contingency. Or the expenditure going to be well beyond even those savings. You will go to the contingency fund because that is an emergency. Lives and limbs and livestock and everything else are at risk. But you telling me buying a car for a minister, buying a new car for a minister, or some such thing is a contingency? Is a contingency? I will tell the government to take heart again from the coalition government, who in 2017 and 2018 have the distinction of being the only government in recent memory who have not been able, who have not used the contingency fund for any purpose whatsoever. 2017 and 2018, 2 consecutive years of zero recourse to the contingency fund. Yes, go and check the records. And an Auditor General who would make blaring headlines. I remember him making blaring headlines in 2016 and 2015, and we just come in. Blaring headlines. Said not even one word about the fact that after making the blaring headlines of 2016, the coalition government righted the ship of state and was able to keep the contingency fund intact by not going there. And we did it again in 2018. And had we not had to go for election expenses, emergency expenses, and a payment to a contractor on the penalty of court, we would have done the same thing for 2019. These are facts. But you have an 18 billion on top of another $1 trillion+ budget last year, and on top of 2 other or 3 other contingency fund that they went for. This was an extra 18 billion in 3 weeks under a new parliament, the 13th parliament, but in the same year. And none of the expenditure met the smell test. These people could have brought a supplementary paper and have it debated in parliament. But they don't do that. They do not do that. They prefer to spend the money and then seek approval afterwards because it becomes a fait accompli. I don't spend the money anyhow. What are you going to do about it? That is the approach. That is the approach. But if this is a new steel of the opposition that says, I will no longer be making all this noise in the house and then staying quiet when it comes to the vote, right? So by refusing to openly acquiesce to the passage of the budget and the contingency fund, the opposition is saying we ain't about to remain silent anymore. We would rather say no than stay silent. And in that open expression, they are signaling their displeasure with the budget and with the government's relationship with the opposition. they are signaling that it will be business unusual. And notwithstanding the fact that you got 36 and we got 29, and notwithstanding all the wrangling and so on among our 29, we are going to coalesce when it comes to the people's interests and when it comes to voting in this house. As I listen to the budget and I come to my conclusion, and all my long years in budgeting, here I have some more observations on the budget. I've given some last week. I noticed Dr. Hines has picked up on some that I gave, and he has elaborated, he has agreed with them and he's elaborated on them. So here's some more. I think it is time that a robust reform be done to the standing orders. I said so last time. The standing orders are like the laws that govern the house. They're the laws that govern the house, the standing orders. And those standing orders have not gone through reform, a major reform, and I would think in at least decades. They are old, they're outdated, and they're unsuited for a modern economy and an economy that has passed the $1 trillion mark and will be there for a considerable length of time. So there are significant standing orders that need to change, replace, modernize, updated, upgraded, and so on. And I think the opposition, because the government is not going to do it, it's in their favor. And when you have a compliant speaker or a friendly speaker, that makes matters worse. That makes matters worse. And all those conditions are in the existing 13th Parliament. Drawing from houses like the House of Representatives in the United States, the Senate also, I think, one of the standing orders should enable a speaker to cede remaining time to another speaker. In other words then, especially what happened in the last house, a person like Campbell, who is the leader of the APNU, and because of the machinations of what took place among the WIN, in that all the people ended up, or almost all the people ended up taking the high slots, the high minute slots of 30 plus 5, Campbell ended up with 20 minutes. The leader of the APNU ended up with 20 minutes, 15. In fact, all the APNU people ended up with 20 minutes. All of the APNU people. That's the height of the selfishness that took place among the opposition. So in that context, and notwithstanding it's only 12, it would have been known that the leader of the APNU team will require some additional time. So the standing order should have allowed one person to cede some of the time, or several persons to cede, say, 2 minutes each. And if you say 5 persons ceded 2 minutes, that's 10 minutes. So Campbell now has 30 minutes to produce and to give more elaboration and so on. I don't see anything wrong with that. I don't understand why a standing order can't be updated or upgraded to allow the ceding of minutes. So that is one that the opposition should be pressed for. There's nothing controversial about it. And like Heinz said, and picked up on a point I had raised, all of them should get 30 plus 5 minutes, all. And when I was there, the estimates, the examination of the estimates, House used to start at 10 o'clock. So if the House, for the purpose of the passage of the budget, started at 10 o'clock and ended at 10, no later than 10, with breaks, with 3 breaks, an hour for the lunch, whatever you call it, half hour for the whatever, and 15 minutes for coffee or, or loo and whatever. All of this can be accommodated properly and easily. And it helps towards the wider debate and more intense debate on the budget. The budget clearly shows that because it's not anchored in a development plan, or because it's not anchored in a medium-term expenditure forecast or framework, then outcomes will be uncertain, and inputs will vary widely and do not tend towards a focused output. So you have budgets, disparate budgets. They're not connecting to any dots. At the outset, this is the first budget of a new 5-year term. One expected to see the broad paintbrush of what it would look like by 2030. Broad paintbrush for the sectors. Measurable performances that can be expected, and so on. The broad policy strokes, and so on. We didn't see that. Again, as I said, because the budget is not anchored in a development plan or this medium-term expenditure forecast, right? A medium-term expenditure forecast is a 3 to 5 year budget tool that will bridge policy priorities, give them fixed constraints, and so on. It essentially moves beyond annual budgeting. It puts back annual budgeting within a construct. And it sees the annual budgeting as part of an overall collective called a plan, a long-term plan. It gives a vision. And therefore, it offers a better opportunity of utilizing the resources that you have and those that will be coming for more productive use and better outcomes. As you can see, because of the absence of that, among other reasons, the budget, none of the budgets has been able to achieve even the projections. Even the projections. You got projects that have heavy overhangs. You have projects that have not taken into account the human resources, the material resources, financial resources. So as a result, many of them are heavily delayed. You have projects that are so political that they are being rushed to cut ribbons, whether they be for national elections or local government elections or otherwise. You have projects that are being pushed into regions that are ill-suited for them. as opposed to other projects, other regions that will be best suited for them. You have projects that are being put in regions for which they don't have the linkages in terms of transportation to move the product efficiently from the place of production to the place of manufacturing, to the market. You have all those things that are taking place while critical oil money is being spent. And spent is being used in the same jargon as spent force when you become a spent force. So that is why I'm using spent. So there is this clamor, and I would urge that in the absence of development plan, that we seek to put in place this medium-term economic framework, right? Because it will help the government to better allocate resources to the priority areas. It will help the government to improve spending and expenditure efficiency. And of course, it will enhance budget predictability and accountability. And this is important. When a government has to go back to Parliament soon after a budget has passed for supplementary spending, or go to the contingency fund for contingency funds advances in lieu of supplementary requests. And government is doing this as much as 4 times a year for large sums. Large sums. When supplementary spending is accounting for 10, 15% of trillion-dollar budgets, budgeting has become meaningless. Meaningless. Because you're not talking here about 1 to 2%. You're talking here where in one budget request last year, they're asking for anywhere in the region about $80 billion. That's not budgeting. That's raiding a treasury. And the government has to, especially when it comes to these supplementary, the law provides that an extensive arrangement has to be gone into before you get a vote. Now, where that law might have been absorbed in the breach when the numbers were smaller, I think the opposition must ensure that the law is enforced. The Financial Management, Fiscal Management and Accountability Act must be enforced to the letter. Especially now that we're going to be 2 trillion up soon, because we're at 1.558. And when we add in all them supplementary for this year, it might go to 1.7, 1.8. The opposition must ensure that the Fiscal Management and Accountability Act is enforced to the letter, and especially when it comes for requests for supplementary provision. There's a procedure that is laid out, the criteria that is laid out, there's a schema that is laid out, how these requests must come and what must accompany these requests. That has not been done. And when asked, the Ministry of Finance, there seems to be and the Minister of Finance, there seems to be a reticence to provide the information. That's indeed all information provision under this government. I know people laughed, but there was a time on this government when if you wanted weather data, you couldn't go to the meteorological station, you had to go to the office of the president. You have a commission of no information. Getting information and data from this government is like pulling teeth. Yet they are going to be the first ones who's going to run out and tell you, oh, it's not 58% poverty. That thing using data that they collect during COVID and in the coalition year. How much is it then? Have you begun any work to find out what the poverty situation in Guyana is? And not only to do with doing another household budget survey or household living condition survey. How about a study to map poverty in Guyana? And using that map to channel resources to ameliorate, reduce, or completely get rid. Instead, you are spending money and then telling people how much you spend, and because you spend so much, it should have resulted in reduction of poverty. You hear these people talk about, oh, we've been given salary increases and that will help to reduce poverty. That is the level of asininity we have been getting. No data, no metric to measure these reductions. But as soon as somebody uses a proxy because they can't get granular data from you or any kind of data, you're ready to cuss them out. But you can't produce a figure up to this day. And you can't tell us that you have begun or you've budgeted to do a study in this budget to really understand the structure and nature of poverty in this country. But you're willing to go there and abuse down and get your sycophants out. Yes, indeed, they're really sick. It's not SYC anymore. It's SICKO. Sicko. That's what they are, because they got some of them who are willing to discard their robes, professional and otherwise, just to be seen to be part of the friends and family and favorites, because we know they're the ones who are benefiting from the largesse of this country. Sick. I'm surprised that a particular one, you're always out there, whether it's an engineering question or anything, medical, he's there. He got the answer. A country and this government, no data is produced, but you're expected to agree to all the rambling and the verbosity that you will bring out about it. Meanwhile, again, as a parting shot, it was the coalition government that provided access to information in this country in various areas. I repeat, it is the coalition government that started to produce an annual debt report, a comprehensive annual debt report on all aspects of the debt in this country, including sensitivity analyses, including risk analyses. And we first produced that in 2018, and we produced another one in 2019, and we left one in preparation for 2020, which happily they produced. But that was the last. That was the last. You want data on debt, you got to go and compile it yourself based on pieces that you see in the papers. Every piece of information that should be given to the public is held closely guarded. And it's as if this government doesn't want to know, because it will give a lie to the narrative of what they might be saying. You think the government don't know that it's not 7,000 workers who were severed from the GuySuCo? ILO did a study conducted by Dr. Thomas Singh from University of Guyana, senior lecturer at University of Guyana. He did the study for ILO. And the study will show you 4,000 plus workers were severed, not 7,000. The Hansard, this information is in the Hansard. But that is not with them. They put into the minds of their supporters. 7,000, they can't get it out. That's a figure. 7,000. They don't say nearly or any such thing. It's 7,000. 7,000. This coalition is genius. What did Amanzo, Walton, Desir say about these supporters? I got to go back and check. But they can't. They are masters at the disinformation. We remove 200 taxes. Wait a minute. Where are these 200 taxes? What are they? Ask the question in Parliament by Honorable, at that time, Annette Ferguson. Y'all go and see what was the response. The man said, he don't have to say, they're already in the public domain. Bleating, we remove 200 taxes. But doesn't want to tell you, what are these 200 taxes that you say you remove? Name them. Put them out there. And they play games. Because I think it was last year. When Jagdeo went to public and said, no, it's not 200. It's more like 300 something. We miscounted. But like the one in resonate, so they're going back to the 200. They're playing games. Because the focus group, this information is intended to, they know how gullible they are. And they will soak it up. And they will feed the social media and so on with it. But like Annette says, and she choked up on it, there are not enough who come out and debunk these. I know we get tired because they have so many on their side and there's so few on our side. They can debunk, they can come back again tomorrow and say the same thing and say the same thing and say the same thing and so on. And so after a while you get worn down and it's out there. So the last thing is what they said and it's out there. But we got enough soldiers on social media and warriors who instead of going all over the place and minding people's business and who in there, who sleep with this one and who sleep with the one and all this kind of thing, could spare 10 minutes and help in this fight. All the social influencers and all them, all over the place today. But these things mean nothing to them. It's who there with who and who there with who and who sleep with who and all kind of story. But this part here, this is not for them. And yet they are in the best position to help in the dissemination of credible information. And now that Stabroek News is going, heaven help us when it comes to independent, credible news. It's not to say that Stabroek News was a paragon of virtue, but I tell you, without them being part of that landscape, we're worse off. We will be worse off. Folks, come to the end.
Manners and respect to Mr. Winston Jordan. You is a great man to the Guyanese citizen. As a minister to the South America land, call Guyana. So much negative, so much propaganda. The PPP are trying to tell upon you, but keep speaking the truth. The truth is always there forever. The best finance minister I ever seen in Guyana. Oh yeah, Lord, please guide and protect him each and every day. He is full of knowledge and experience and things that going on in this country. Jordan is a cool